Welcome to the Cycle World Podcast. I'm Mark Hoyer, editor-in-chief. I'm with Kevin Cameron, our technical editor. Our topic today is list of crazy bikes that were killed. So we have a list of the internet's favorite thing, a list. We'll try to end on an odd number so the producer can say that we have 11 or 9. But we're going to talk about crazy concept bikes. So before we get into it, America's favorite transportation rider, maybe in competition with Kevin Cameron, but they have, different styles, let's say. But Peter Egan has released Landings in America through Octane Press. I wrote a book review on this, so I won't do the book review. We'll put a link in the description. You can go read the review. Piper Cub, 1987. Peter and Barbara flew 7,000 miles around the United States. And it's not just a travel log. It's the best of Peter Egan. It really is. It's historical context, geography, local history, Americana, the struggles of traveling with less luggage space than on a Goldwing. 20 pounds they had. That was all the luggage they could fit in the 65 horsepower Piper Cub.
It's like go light camping.
Yeah, 100%. Just anything. Anyway, everything you'd love. There's a 32-page photographic insert, and it's all snapshots, of course, on film, because that's what we were doing back in the ancient days. And it really the photos lend an intimacy to the book that is really charming. It's sort of like social media of the trip. It really is. Like it's what we would post on Instagram now, and it really gives a good feel. So. Go check that out. There's a link, like I said, link in the description to check out that book. And then we're giving a shout out to Battery Tender. This is the Charge and Start. It's a 1 amp trickle charger, or smart charger, excuse me. Smart charger meaning it knows when the battery is nearly full and it won't overcharge your battery. It's also a 1200 amp jump box, which came in handy for me the other day because I've been trying to extend the life of the battery on my pickup truck. And I'm thrifty. I want to use it up till the plates just can't do it anymore. It's a 7-year-old battery that I've taken reasonably good care of, and that's why it's 7 years old. I told my friend
extending its life by not replacing it.
Yes, so we're ready to replace it, but also I want to wait till it just can't give anymore. And it's the summer, and it's going to stop giving because it gets hot. And I think that's it's either when it gets really hot or when it gets really cold. That's when a battery goes, but I'll be okay because I have this. So yeah, it comes with jumper cables. It's reverse polarity protected, all kinds of extensions to get it out to your vehicle, to the battery. And thank you, Battery Tender, for your support. All right, moving into crazy bikes that got killed
or didn't.
Yeah, there's some that are still going. The Suzuki GT750 two-stroke triple, 71 to 77. That's a pretty good run.
Yeah. This was a motorcycle that had distinction. I mean, 3 70 by 64 millimeter cylinders are capable of some real punch. And when this motor was modified for AMA 750 racing in 1972, hands down the most powerful engine in the series, and stayed that way. Water cooling didn't hurt.
Yeah.
Because it keeps pistons from becoming hot and gummy, which makes them stick to things.
It's a question I have, though, because it's a two-stroke, so it's firing a lot more often.
Yep.
But it's also bringing in cool air into the crankcase. Is that not helping?
Well, what they found when they went to direct injection on certain two-strokes was that the crankcase became really hot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's bearing friction. So without fuel evaporating down there, pour alcohol in your hands like in COVID days, and your hands feel cold. That's evaporative cooling. And fuel and air forming a mixture, cools itself off. And that's why crankcases always were fairly cool. The big end bearing itself was fairly hot. But the thing about GT750 was that it had no face. They didn't tell you that this is a sport tourer or that it was a sporting tourer or a touring sportster. It was without identity. And I think that was made in an era when people believed in the automatic power of novelty. People will love this because it has a two-stroke engine or whatever. And I also heard that these motorcycles were treasured in Germany because the question was, who can get to Spain quickly enough at summer vacation time or at any other time of year to get the sea-facing rooms in the hotels? Will it be the Swiss businessmen in big inch BMWs and Mercedes? Or will it be the young madmen on water buffaloes? You could run them wide open and they would just sit there and hum along like an outboard motor on Troll and be just going 100 miles an hour.
Well, it was such a time, it was a real time of technical flexing. You know, you had,
it was.
The Japanese companies were, you know, they were established, they were making some money and they were like, okay, what can we do? Yeah. Novel. What can we do that's different? You know, you look at, well, we'll get to it later, but there was the Rotary. Honda came out with the CB750A automatic, you know?
Yep.
I mean, so it was a time where people were flexing and they were also, I think, looking for their next phase of identity.
Yeah.
You know, what will the company mean? You know, Yamaha had some really big hits in the 70s, but, you know, their big bore four-stroke stuff was a little bit.
Well, what is it?
It was like, what is it? It was sort of this conceptual idea of like the 1100 triple shaft drive. And it was high performance, but, you know, it wasn't a super bike. So,
no.
Yeah, I think everybody figured that out. But, you know, it was just an interesting time. Suzuki, you know, got to GS 750 and we had a pretty robust, you know, experience there. But back to the water buffalo.
One of the problems with any two-stroke with more than one cylinder is that the width, say if you're building a CB750, you're going to crowd the cylinders together and the cam drive between them in this case as closely as you can. But a two-stroke has transfer ports coming out of the side of it. They're like the handles on a cup or a mug. So what Suzuki did was, if you imagine looking down on a row of three of these, they rotated them an eighth of a revolution so that the transfer loops didn't conflict for the same space. So they were able to crowd the cylinders that much closer together and minimize the kayak paddle motion that a unbalanced, that is no balance shaft triple has. Plus it was a quite a massive engine, so I expect that it was smooth enough.
Well, I mean, it was a time where we didn't really pay attention to vibration that much.
Sure.
You know, we inherently looked to reduce it with the four-cylinder, as Honda did. I mean, there's still buzz there. You know, that's secondary, right?
Yep.
But primary was pretty well taken care of. Ducati did it with the 90-degree V-twin, which just is magically smooth.
And BMW.
Yeah, and Norton kicked out, you know, the Commando, and when it took it up to 828 cc's, and then rebalanced the crank, and then mounted the whole thing in a, you know, like a rubber, the engine.
A bowl of gelatin.
Yeah, a bowl of gelatin. You know, the engine and the swing arm were kind of unitized, and that was separated from the rest of the chassis with gigantic rubber doohickeys, rubber mounts, and then shims or vernier adjusters that allowed the engine to, sorry,
Move in just a
Spotify,
single plane.
in
Yeah.
a single plane. So it would rotate like this, and they changed the balance to work, the balance factor on the crank to work with those rubber donuts. And it's like somebody throws a switch at around, depending on how you have it adjusted and stuff, but 3,000, 2,800, 3,200, somewhere in that range. It gives you a real good feeling of life. Shake, 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 and then quick, you rev up. I tell you what, a good running Norton Commando in third gear, rolling on at 2,800 and taking that up to 38, 4,000, a little bit more. That's a thing of beauty. The torque curve on that bike is pure. It's really nice. It's nothing by today's standards. Probably 50 foot-pounds on our dyno rear wheel, somewhere in that range, 45 to 55, depending on how they're running, and a thing of beauty. But we weren't doing anything. The point is, we weren't doing anything with balance, and so I think a great big triple that sounds relatively understressed and massive is a way of controlling vibration without a balance shaft.
What's remarkable about this engine is that, as powerful as it was extremely simple. Each cylinder had 2 transfer ports, just as though it were the original DKW RT125, which just had those two little transfer ports. In the Suzuki, they were big, but they so aimed and directed those ports such that a rising column of fresh charge adhered to the non-exhaust cylinder wall, cruised up to the cylinder head, arced over. These cylinder heads had no squish. They were just a smooth curve, and it worked fine. I made a set of Suzuki copy heads for my H2R, and they worked just as well as the squish heads. Then that column of fresh charge aims downward to the exhaust port, and as it's going out the exhaust port, here comes a returning positive pressure wave from the exhaust to say, this far and no farther. So the exhaust port closes without undue loss of charge. They got the cylinder filling down on this model so that it made good power. And Gary Nikken said of the AMA Superbike, or not Superbike, AMA 750 class bike, that'd be a pretty good little engine. It worked so damn hard to ride. Because in the one hand, you might have a copy of Gordon Jennings' Two-Stroke Tuner's Handbook.
I do.
Which seems to imply that long, gentle tapers will give you a wide power band. GT750 road race engines had long, gentle tapers, and the engine was tuned to a razor's edge. So some clash there of ideas with reality, but they were remarkable engines because of the power they were able to get from them. They didn't necessarily do everything well as racers. They started out with a modified stock frame. They weren't at all pleased when they got to Loudon, and Irv Kanemoto gave Gary Nikken a special short wheelbase C&J frame with adjustable everything, and Gary proceeded to win the race in a manner not consonant with the wishes of the factory. It's always a danger in racing. You let these people who know about racing, things that no engineer knows, that's why you need them. You let them have your latest product, and they're going to find defects and fix them.
Yeah.
And you may find, is that egg on my face?
Yeah, it's terrible to get beat by privateers when you're the fastest.
As with any of these idiosyncratic motorcycles, there's a small group of people who just love them to pieces, and they ride them. So everybody has to have big sales success, and of course, X6 was a good seller. A lot of the two-strokes, such as Yamaha's RDs, just sold in tremendous numbers.
Well, you mentioned RD, and you were talking about 2 transfer ports, and then the 400s have 7,
They have
5.
they have A, B, and a finger. Yeah, a reed port. So sort of 4.5 or 5, you could say. And of course, the reason that you have separate ports rather than just continuing to make the horse wider is that you want to direct the streams differently.
You're missing it, Spotify. I'm telling you, what Kevin just did with his face was awesome.
So, and that's a story for another day. But
Yeah, I'm just thinking we have a transfer port podcast, probably the theory and execution.
yeah, there'll be 3 listeners.
Well,
But it will be intense.
I want to sell it. I want popular podcasts, which, by the way, folks, share this with people who might like it. I want popular podcasts, or as our producer likes to say, bangers. And you guys took the TZ750 and ran with it. We appreciate that. That's like at 80,000 views. So we want bangers, but we also want to support the core audience. We want to talk about Peter Zylstra and the XR750 and get into the molecules of metallurgy, because there's so much history that isn't Moss Disco, isn't like, ooh, so shiny. Like, we're going to do a couple, like we've got concept bikes coming. We're going to do a list of insane concept bikes, and we have this list going. We want to do some entertainment, but we also want to do the transfer ports, or stay tuned for combustion chambers.
Yes. So what's next?
Well, I wanted to say, I think, the Water Buffalo kind of suffered from a couple things that led to its demise. And one was forthcoming emissions standards. And as you said, it didn't have a face. It didn't connect with the rider's concept of themselves, I guess. To me, that seems to be one of the most, my observation after being in the motorcycle industry for a long time and watching bikes come and go, if the motorcycle doesn't evoke a visual that resonates with the person's self-image or desire to change self-image, then it doesn't succeed.
Think about BMW GS as the very opposite.
Yeah.
BMW for years made excellent, very conservative, almost imperceptible motorcycles. And they wondered why their sales weren't there. And then they decided to let their engineers loose on something they were already doing themselves in their spare time. And the GS model, which has those big, long legs for off-road operation. How many people go off-road? Don't care. That thing sells like 1/3 of all sales.
Yeah, it's amazing.
When you hit it with the personality, when you create an identity or a story in which the reader wants to be an actor, you've got something.
Yeah. I mean, BMW did a few things. They did the R90S, and they put some pretty cool paint schemes on there, and they really put a lot of sizzle into an otherwise touring oriented bike. I mean, they came out with the R75, and that was a big change for them.
Yeah.
But they really kicked it up with the 900, right? They put the fairing on, and they gave it this sporting personality, and it changed BMW's image. And then, you have the GS, and I think BMW's brand evolution following that is that they did have a really loyal following going, and they could build these bikes, RTs. I want the qualities of an RT. RTs are great. That's their sport touring, basically flat twin. It's their biggest flat twin touring bike. And they had a good audience, but they were so focused on that audience that it wasn't really any kind of outreach. GS was a huge outreach program. And it funded, I think it gave them the basis to experiment and the basis to take risks, such as we're going to build a 4-cylinder superbike.
Just as the 50cc step through funded everything that Honda did in a big way. It just connected them to people who needed that product.
Yeah, the Cub really,
it just became a hose dumping money into the company,
into a
allowing them to do big R&D.
256.
Yeah, all that stuff,
All the Grand
all
Prix
that cool
racing.
stuff,
Yeah.
which we revere.
Yeah. It just shows the importance of high volume, moderate cost, two-wheel products. And we're
And
seeing
hitting the market
hitting
on
the
the
market.
mark.
Yep. It's pretty cool. Anyways, let's go to the next bike. So we've decided why the GT750 Water Buffalo stopped.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a good one. Honda Rune, 2004, 2005. This was a really this came out of the Zodia concept, which we'll talk about in our concept podcast forthcoming. The Zodia was a show bike. Japanese companies in the late 90s and early 2000s were just doing crazy things. There was lots of money in the industry. The Tokyo Motor Show was spectacular. The stuff coming out. So Honda had this Zodia, and it had this link front end, trailing link front end, and crazy styling. The Rune was basically conceptually like that, although I believe Zodia was V-twin, and then the Rune was the flat six. It was the Goldwing engine, and it was just chrome. It had these full skirted fenders, crazy styling, and it had that Zodia style front end. And I remember talking to the guy at Honda who insisted that it get that front end, and the production cost on it was something crazy. Like the front end alone was $1,800 to manufacture, which, like I shudder to think what we could have gotten a fork for at that time, $80.
Yeah.
I mean, for mass production, crazy expense. Beautiful.
Well, the thing is that often valid is the remark often heard, which is Honda builds motorcycles for customers they wish they had. And an example is that there was an ad firm that they must have done business with in the 80s who said, we feel that there is a silent sea of potential motorcyclists who want a car bike. They want it to be silent, clean, safe. And they built Pacific Coast. I've seen 2 Pacific Coasts ever. First, there were executives of the American Honda on their way home on their long distance ride from Daytona. There was one there. And then maybe 10 years ago, I saw one across the street from the library in town. I went over to talk to the owner, and he said, it fits a place in my collection. So, and I like to ride everything that I have.
Yeah, they were actually motorcycles of very high utility, and that's the thing, is that's not resonating with us.
Yeah.
Practical concerns are so low on the list. I mean, they're there, and what they usually are is justifications for buying the bike that you really love. So it evokes the feeling and the passion, and then you can say to yourself, well, it gets good mileage and it has a top trunk or whatever it is that you like about it.
Yes.
You can justify it from practical terms, and that's how we go. And the Rune, I think during that time, that 2000 era, Harley Davidson was, the whole industry was ramping up to the crash basically in 08. 2006, Harley sold nearly 400,000 motorcycles. I think around 380 is what the number is.
Wonderful stuff.
It's amazing. Yeah. And it's driving the industry, and everybody, especially during that time, when you look back into the late 90s, you had 2000, you had the Vulcan 2000, you had all these people building giant cruisers bigger than the last, looking for a piece of that giant cruiser market. And Harley kind of stayed the course. They always kept their bikes in a more human scale. They're still big and heavy, but they carry it low, and they never expanded. Like a Vulcan 2000 is impossibly huge. I'm a big guy, and it was huge. The Rune, pretty big bike, The
Yeah.
Rune had the advantage of being a flat six and carrying that weight low, and it did. Honda's fit and finish. They've done some really spectacular things with their suppliers, their chrome, their paint. VFRs of the era, beautifully finished bikes, really nice paint. Like you went, oh, liquid, And the Rune was spectacular in person. We had a Rune test bike, wrote a big test on it. Steve Anderson, I believe, did that, and then we performance test these things. And so Don Canet shows up, and we're at the old building in Newport Beach, and here's the Rune, and I just rode it to work. It's warmed up, and I'm just enjoying it. I'm going to write about it a little bit. And he's like, oh, I got to test that thing. I'm like, yeah, cool. Here, check it out, dude. It rides nice, And so he hops on it, and in full Don Canet fashion, he gets a very quick feel for it, and then throws the clutch. Like, just got on it, throws it, and it's like, what is it, $25,000? Throws the clutch, smokes the tire, and does a rolling like power slide
Yes.
in the parking lot because he's Don Canet.
Bravo.
And yeah, it was pretty good. Beautiful riding bike, but hard to sell. Didn't last.
Well, it could be looked upon as a throw beyond cruisers. Let's just see what this does. We'll make something so extreme. Remember Steve Anderson's law. Motorcycles are radiating petals of a single flower. And you would imagine that all these qualities that are represented by the petals would average out to the center, and most people would buy the center. People buy the extremes. The extreme is attractive. The center is beige boxes with keys on them. No, we don't want that. And on the one hand, it's an attempt to outdo Harley with the concept. On the other, you're going to get egged if you sell your Harley, buy a Rune, and show up for the ride, because what have you done?
Well,
So,
it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't fit the Harley narrative, and that's what Harley's great success is building a narrative that has a certain story. And I think there are some people who would go out and buy a Rune and be happy with the Rune. It would be probably additive to what they've already got. It's not your only bike. It's not the one bike solution. Anyway, it was a beautiful expression of a little bit of maybe corporate hubris, like, oh, we can do anything. And spectacular fit and finish, really interesting concept. And at a time where people were doing crazy things. You look at Yamaha redoing, with the most unfortunate timing, redoing the VMAX and coming out in 08, 09 after the crash, because this is all planned beforehand. It's the same with the VFR 1200, very expensive 1200 Sport Tour, sort of not fully vetted on. I don't think it ever decided, what it should be. I think they were thinking like maybe super high speed something, but then it was a sport tour. It was sort of MotoGP meets luxury. Pretty nice bike to ride, but man, it came out and it just was not a great time. It was very expensive, and everybody was suffering financially, and motorcycle sales halved in about a year. So it was unfortunate. We're going to stick on the Honda theme and switch to the DN01 08 to
favorite of mine.
DN01's a favorite of mine. I wrote the test on it, and I really, as a tester, I try to come in with an open mind. I try to wear the hat of whoever might be the customer here, and I just approach the product and say, I'm going to use this as a two-wheeler. What does it do? How does it do it? What does it communicate? And I actually really liked riding that thing. It had this swash plate. It's sort of like a air conditioning compressor, a 10-piston air conditioning compressor. It has a wobble plate with these pistons.
Variable stroke barrel hydraulic pump from aviation.
And that was the transmission. That was gearing, and it just kind of did its thing.
Change the tilt of the swash plate. See, all the pistons are being driven by the edge of the swash plate as it does this crazy penny on the table motion. And the variable output goes to a hydraulic motor that drives the load, in this case, the rear wheel. So as the tilt of the swash plate is increased, so the rear wheel speeds up because more volume is being sent to it. So, and this drive was licensed from Battellini in Italy, which is an agricultural machinery company. And
Well, there's a note that I'm going to send if I work with anybody in product development on consulting or whatever, it's like, don't go to the agricultural companies for your ideas.
But the great thing is, the reason that motorcycles have more than one transmission speed is that the engine does not have the same torque from 0 to maximum like certain electric motors do. So we have a starting gear and a running gear, the 2-speed, like Indian won the 1911 TT with a 2-speed gearbox.
Dual range
3 speeds.
hydromatic.
Yeah. Power glide. And the more speeds you have, the more narrowly you can tune the engine. The final ideal is to have an infinitely variable transmission so that it doesn't have discrete ratios at all. And in fact, you can set this thing up so that the engine sits at constant speed, peak power RPM, for example, and the transmission changes the ratio continuously as you accelerate. People hated it.
It's true, but I have an appreciation for the rubber band CVT. I love it's perfect in a scooter. It's perfect in side-by-sides, off-road stuff like that.
Yep.
And it's tunable. It's very dumb. It doesn't need electronics. You can have it. That's what Nissan does with their metal belt CVT. It's all electronically controlled, and that's why you can put gears in it. Aprilia did it with the Mana 850, which was a CVT motorcycle, kind of a utility bike, pretty fun to ride. And you could do gears with that. They impose the ability to control that. But if you just do a primary with weights and a secondary with a helix and a spring, all it gets is the torque on the shaft. And then you play with all of these ratios. I put a real fancy one on the Can-Am Defender that we have for UTV Driver, our off-road publication, 4-wheel off-road publication. And it's built by KWI Clutching, and they take the stock parts of a CVT and they blueprint the core pieces of it. They blueprint it so your sheaves are perfect. There's no deviation, so you're engaging with the belt very precisely. They have this thing called the float. Yeah, they have this thing called
no yanking.
Yeah, they have this thing called the float mod, where it allows one of the sheaves to float on a spring, so that at full ratio the belt becomes off center, but with the float mod it follows. So you have less deviation, therefore the belt runs cooler and the engagement is better. You can tune the weights very easily on the primary to change the engagement, and then the helix and spring are tuned, and it's really so getting to it is not shifting. Your relationship with the engine is different, and we love shifting in motorcycles. We love the various sounds. We've just been imprinted, but anyway, CVT, when it's working, it's great. It's simple.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's simple and wonderful. And the weights, like on that Can-Am, I tuned it, target 6,500 flat out, and that's how you tune it. You get out on your flat dirt road, and you nail it. And if the RPM goes good, and then it hits at 6,500 and it holds 6,500 until you run out of ratio and the RPM goes up to your top speed, you've hit it. And if it doesn't go to 65 and that's where you want it, you add these rare earth magnet weights into these little cylinders, and they just go click, and they're, you poke them out with a stick to get them out because they're strong, and they won't come out. And they'll stay right where you put them, and so you can tune to your hearts. So CVTs are great, but we love a transmission, and the DN01 essentially is a CVT. I mean, it's it hits that single ratio and kind of goes, what?
Infinitely variable. It's like a snowmobile. The engine, when you hit the thumb, it goes "Oh," into a big honking noise, which is peak power
Yeah.
RPM,
And
and the
let me tell you,
snowmobile pulls away.
retired exec at Harley Davidson, Jerry Wilkie, is a big fan of snowmobiles, and he's got a place up north in Wisconsin. And holy cow, he's like, you got to ride this. And he had I think it was a Skidoo. It was the 800 two-stroke.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, just watch yourself. I was riding a Yamaha of previous generation, which was pretty low. It was like the evolution of dirt bikes. Sleds were low. And then as they got higher performance, they got more travel and they got taller. Anyway, he sent me out on that 800 two-stroke. He's like, we're going to come up to a power line road. So we're riding through the woods. And I'm like, holy cow, this thing's amazing. And it's super fast. But pulling out onto basically the drag strip, this high tension line road. So it's a maintenance road that's just flat and straight. And he's like, yeah, watch out, but hit it. And I hit it. And it was like 0 to 100 in seconds. I mean, it was steam coming out the back. It was so great. Very
Nelson
cool.
went to a Bombardier demo, and he said one of the other journalists, when he hit the thumb button, he stayed still and the snowmobile left. It jerked itself right out of his hands. And Nelson said that was the fastest accelerating anything that I'd ever been on. So don't make superior sniffing noises about CVT, because what multi-speed gearboxes attempt to do, a CVT actually does accomplish, holding the engine at its point of best performance.
Yeah. Well, we don't need to make sniffing noises, Kevin, because we don't buy them.
Yeah.
We don't have to do anything, but they generally don't sell. So the DN01 was this very low concept, long,
darty looking. Yeah.
Yeah. It had sort of the, futuristic Japanese comics type design.
Fuel tank and front fairing were sort of made into this big gummy bear thing. And
it was fantastically expensive. It was something around 13 to
15.5 was what I saw.
Yeah, 15.5. So it's very expensive, and it really it communicated to the American market, I'm a giant scooter.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of singing the defense of that thing as I wrote it, because when I tested it, it was probably January. It was sometime in California winter, which you think like, oh, okay, it's 64 and it's a little chilly. But in fact, where I was riding, there was snow on the ground. I rode it out to Borrego Springs, and I came up through Ranchita, which is at the top of the ridge above where it drops into the desert. And I didn't even think to check the weather. It had been a little cold and rainy, in near our offices, Newport Beach, Orange County. And I took my big loop and I crested Ranchita after riding up S22. And there was snow and I was cold. And I'm like, well, I can't, to go back through the desert was extra hours. And it was like 4 PM. It was going to get dark at 5. And I didn't want to, I was like, no, that's too far to go back all the way around. So I'm like, I'll just forge ahead. It's not going to stick too much on the roads. Well, I got to places where I had to I had to cross a sheet of ice, basically packed snow and that frozen water we never see around here.
Yeah.
Outside anyways, only in your cocktails. And I got to this sheet of ice, and I really favored the ease of rolling on the throttle and the control of the torque and the lowness of it. And I was able to go across this thing without crashing, low CG. And I just thought, well, that's a pretty far out use case, but you know what? It's fun. That was pretty good. So I'm running around the office saying like, you know what, this thing's actually, it's really useful and it's kind of fun and it's very easy to ride. And some of the other guys are like, it's a scooter. And I'm like, no, it's not a scooter. And I kept saying that. And then David Edwards, editor at the time, my boss, said, huh. And in perfect David style, he just thought about that and he went off and he was writing his editor's note on the test. And I was genuinely positive about it. I said, it is expensive. You can't get around that. And will this resonate with the market? Is this asking a question no one asked? The answer was yes. um, but I said from a technical perspective, it's pretty good motorcycle-like substance. And, David went off and noodled and he said, yeah, it's cool to ride or whatever. But Hoyer says it's not a scooter is what he said in his editor's note. And he said, unfortunately, he's right because it doesn't have any storage. And he was totally right. Here's this thing that looks like a scooter and you open the seat and there's no place to put anything. You can't carry anything on it. And so, Chef Alan Greeley, formerly the Golden Truffle, like he rode a Honda Helix for years. Why did he do that? Because it was super easy to ride. You could just pop on it. It had leg protection and it had a giant storage container. And some of those were so good and so big that manufacturers put stickers on them and said, no pets. Like don't put your kitty in the underseat storage. Chairman Meow, not good. And so he once picked up lobster though, live lobster. He was cooking for somebody and he took off across LA on his Helix because in LA you can lane share. And he knew he could get to the lobster, pick it up and get back and not be subject to traffic. And the DN01 didn't have that. So, it truly was a question that no one asked. But it was a time where Honda was experimenting with looking for market extension. You're always looking for the new customer. We have a good core audience of people who are enthusiasts and want to buy the motorcycles we buy that we keep buying. We keep buying cruisers. Sport bikes are selling not too bad. Affordable nakeds, adventure bikes, we're there. But you're always looking for what's your next market. And that's what BMW did, getting away from RT, adding GS. It was like new market, new type of bike. City electrics, CEO2, CEO4, we're looking for a new market. So that's what Honda's always done. And I have a lot of respect for their flex there and doing that, and DCT and auto clutch and all the stuff that they've been doing. But sometimes you Sometimes you get a DN01 and gosh, you wish these are the times when you wish you could just open the books and say, what'd you lose on that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
What did it cost the tool to make that transmission?
Yeah. And did they use it for anything else? Did it end up in, I don't know.
Well, it was in four-wheelers.
Rototillers. Because, well, seriously, man, I went to Honda's 50th anniversary party in 1998. Joe Parker's was there. This is before I was with Cycle World. I was with Cycle News, and I got to go to the 50th, and it was magnificent. It was the RA71 V12 Formula One car warming up in the pits, piercing, vibrating your organs, taking the breath out of your chest as it revved up. Impossibly loud, impossibly quick revving. All the champions riding around at Motegi on 256 NSR. Freddie was there. They had signs in the corners, giant signs that said downshift, because they wanted the guys to make the bikes make noise.
Yeah.
And you can't, since you can't run outboards at Motegi and you can't run rototillers, they put them in the back of their utility K trucks and they drove them around. So they had this incredible parade of stuff going, like Honda power sports generators in the back of trucks. It was a really big flex, just like the DN01. Unfortunately, no one bought it. Well, Suzuki Rotary RE5. This was Suzuki's early mid 70s soul searching. They had Hustler X6, just a really good, solid value, reliable, made good power, a lot of fun, simple, and they sold the daylights out of them. I think it really helped Suzuki anchor itself in the minds of American consumers.
Yep.
And they're like, okay, we got to expand our reach. What are we going to do? We're technical. We're the future. And Rotaries, were coming in. There was the Audi stuff that wasn't an Audi at first. I'm blanking on what product it was in, but NSU. Yeah. But they had rotary cars, and Mazda was playing with it, and they were building cars for sale. And so Suzuki tried the RE5, and it was weird. Just straight up say it. The gauge was kind of in this cylinder, and it had this top that you could roll back, and it was just a really weirdly interesting product. But it had technical problems in addition to sort of people asking, "What is it?"
Sure. Well, the tip seals on the roughly three-sided rotor, uh, a piston ring is constantly oriented the same way against the cylinder wall, but the tip seals on a rotary engine were constantly changing their angle to the cylinder, or the outer figure eight shaped housing, and this imposed special requirements on the friction between the two. And then there were apex seals where the wall seal and the tip seal, there had to be something to fill in that little corner. And I think about that every time I put in an air conditioner. But it was 400. It was a 500cc four-stroke. Now, some people look at a rotary engine and they see ports through either the faces or the periphery, the housing, and they assume that it must be a two-stroke because ports through the cylinder wall. But in fact, it is a four-stroke, and it had some strikes against it because the combustion chamber at full compression was a kind of loon, like a thin lips together smirk. And out at the corners was a quench zone where combustion was not necessarily complete. So it never really got smiles from the EPA. But
Yeah,
I went to a Kawasaki was running some stuff at Fuji Circuit, and there was the Mazda race car there that day. What a noise! So the engine didn't make it.
The 787B, I think their Le Mans car was legendary for the sound, and I think that's one of the things that makes people also misled about what the combustion process is, because it has a sort of two-stroke sound, but different.
Of course it does, because
It's
the
opening.
apex is opening the exhaust port so rapidly
That's why
that it contains a lot of high frequencies. Yeah.
And it just shocks out the exhaust, and they can be incredibly loud.
Whereas a four-stroke starts to push the poppet valve open very slowly because it has to accelerate it. This is a physical object.
Yeah,
so it goes rather than bark, which a fast-moving edge opening a port, there's nothing. It's fabulously quick. So that makes that sharp sound. Lots of high frequencies there. So once again, they didn't call it Whang Dang Doodle or anything like that. It had no face. It had no image. It was just new. And some people must have bought them.
Yeah.
They were on the market for a little while.
They were noted for smoothness.
And they should have. That's right. They would be very smooth.
Noted for smoothness and, good power, but they had heat problems. And, they had the exhaust system had air intakes on it to kind of run so that when you were moving, it was like ducted cooling basically around the exhaust to take air in and kind of blow it out the back. Otherwise, you got real cooked. So
wonder if it produced a tiny amount of thrust.
I suppose it did. We're gonna jump forward in time to the Yamaha Nikken. To be fair, is being sold in Europe still, but it was the leaning three-wheeler. So it leans like a motorcycle, has two wheels in front, which is, I think, the best idea for three-wheelers. I think the one wheel in the front, the trike, is less technically satisfying from the riding perspective. And maintaining a lean, I think, if you remove leaning from what sort of looks like a motorcycle, I think you remove a lot of the charm for people who love motorcycling. There's another market for three-wheelers that's represented by, various things from Can-Am and Polaris. And there is a market segment that wants those. You know, Rikers and all that have sold well. Nikken, you know, I think you pointed out that it is kind of an outreach. It's looking for a customer that would perceive greater safety and stability.
Yeah.
And having 2 contact patches at front would have to help. And having 3 points of contact would have to help. But
And there's wheelie control, all that extra weight up front.
yeah, but we wheelied it. We got a great image of folks wheeling the Nikken. So,
And then, of course, there's the feeling that you've had too much of the punch and you're seeing double, because it's very strange to look at a motorcycle with 2 front ends for the first time. It's again, as you've pointed out, it's looking to extend your market into put things within reach of people who are, motorcycles. I've always wanted. I don't know. How do you balance them? And a motorcycle that does everything for you is what we're moving toward. Because of this desire, because of the necessity of having all the sales possible, provided you can pay the tooling cost.
Agreed. You know, adding automatics, you have BMW's automatic shift assistant and Honda's DCT. Those are our two best automatic versions that are using gears and a clutch or 2 clutches. We're adding all of the stability enhancements. Those 2 units operate the clutch for you. Honda's got the automatic clutching going on the CB650R, and it's a great system. It does a very good job, and it's sort of, after it lets out the clutch for you in first, it's like the world's smoothest quick shifter. It's a good system, but not everything. I don't think we're trying to do everything, because when I look at the experiments of BMW with the self-balancing motorcycles that would balance for you, they had some concepts, and then they also messed with a GS that would ride itself around the parking lot, automated, which I think was a technical exercise for them. I think they were just saying, like, how do we do this and what do we get from it? More than like, oh, we should do this. But
it just looked wonderful. I went to that thing in Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
So this motorcycle is just cruising around this parking lot, doing all kinds of maneuvers, and then it comes to a stop. It just otherworldly. Nobody's there.
Ultra impressive. My spiritual take on motorcycling is the reason it's so engaging is that it does engage your balance.
And of course, the reason BMW gave for doing this project was to better understand what riders do, what they have to do, because it's possible within living memory to make fundamental errors about motorcycles. For example, the notion that was put forward by Elf with their strange alternative motorcycles that the lowest possible center of gravity is the key to handling. And when Honda built the NSR 500 the first year, 1984, it was slow maneuvering, slow in changing directions, because by putting the fuel on the bottom, they had moved it away from the center of mass. And we have assumptions that we've carried with us that have not been questioned. We probably still have some left. And so I think BMW were quite right to do this study to find out what it is that riders do to control motorcycles.
Right, because you can ask, you can ask a rider, but a lot of times they don't know. Yeah. And they certainly wouldn't know the subtleties. And so if you're trying to get the motorcycle to do something and you have to put the programming in, you have to give it some way to do what it does, and therefore you have to understand the process so that it can be coded and hooked up to sensors and given the opportunity to balance the motorcycle.
Yeah.
And failure will be obvious.
Failure will be horizontal.
Well, the Nikken used the triple out of the FC09 MT09. Great motor, just pretty fun bike to ride. I mean, I think it is conceptually difficult for folks, motorcycle people, to say, yeah, I got to have that. And it was probably different enough that it didn't do a lot of market expansion for them in the United States. Europe is really interesting because it's even though it's a developed market and an advanced market, its utility, the engagement of that motorcycle person every day in their motorcycle. Like, we went to Paris in November, and we went to Rome in a different November, and going through the city when it's raining and it's cold, and it's just kind of that schmeary European almost winter, just kind of gross some days, beautiful in other. And people are riding around with big muffs on their grips, and they're on a scooter, and they have like essentially a skirt, like a cover over their legs that stays with the bike, and they're riding to work. They're wearing a kind of groovy European scooter helmet with a bevel face shield, and doing their thing. And that's, you could see the Nikken there, like, oh, I'm going to ride through the city every day, and I'm going to ride in all weather. And I think having the third wheel up there was pairing the fronts, that way, it was kind of interesting, and it leaned, which kept it charming from a motorcycle perspective.
And of course, with with a conventional motorcycle, the front end is the end that you don't want to lose. If you lose the rear end, that's often manageable. You can save that. When the front goes, it helps if you're Freddie Spencer.
Yeah, I'd say that, the tail wants to do what a caster does. It wants to be back in line.
Yep.
But the front don't care. Next up is what an interesting concept. So Öhlins had in 2004 built a two-wheel drive WR450F. It had a hydraulic drive system that sent some of the drive to the front wheel, and we'll talk about some of that split, because we also have to talk about Christini, who did this mechanically, like with gears and shafts. Same thing. Yamaha ran this thing in Dakar. I believe it won some stages, and it got 7th overall, so not a bad success. I don't recall if we tested the Öhlins version of this, but essentially, you think about one wheel, motorcycles being pushed by one wheel. And just as it is with a four-wheel drive car, like a rally car, I drove, I think it was an Evo 7, the Mitsubishi Evo 7, the Lancer. The closest thing I've ever driven in a car to a motorcycle. Lightweight, loud, no sound deadening. It was a homologation special, or it was, inspired by that anyways. And I don't know enough about the car to do a podcast on that specifically. But if you set that thing in four-wheel drive, it had basically cut slicks. DOT cut slicks is what the tires look like. We had a test car at Road and Track that I got to try. It was unbelievable. So you go into a corner, and on a two-wheel drive car, you sort of had to be careful. You'd turn it. You had good front end feel without drive to the front wheels. You could really feel the steering, but your cornering technique was sort of braking and then getting on the throttle and feeling it get pushed through the corner and steering with the fronts. When you go rally style, it's clawing the front end around the corner. You're turning and you just mat it, and it pulls, like the front goes. Like, they had probably vector turning and all this other stuff, but it was crazy good. And that's kind of what the Christini did. The Christini, particularly in low traction situations where you're rock crawling, or if you're starting on a hill or off camber, it was game changing. The Christini was nice because it was all mechanical. His prototypes used a lot of industrial off-the-shelf components. There were very few custom parts. The fork lower. So the Christini system, Öhlins was hydraulic. They had a pump run off the engine, and it sent drive, controlled drive, and then it had a freewheel, so that if you're going faster than what the sort of the drive ratio was on the front wheel, it would just act like a motorcycle, so that it didn't have drive. You didn't have engine braking at the front, because that would F you up. Christini did that, I think, with essentially like a bicycle cassette type mechanism in the front, so that the front wheel, if the rear was driving it faster, Christini settled on 60% drive to the front wheel. So it was going 60% as fast as the rear. You found that 100% caused push. It just made it not ride like a motorcycle. So you got the benefits. If the rear spun up, it sent more drive to the front. It had clutches. It had shock relieving clutches in it, so that you wouldn't blow apart the mechanism if you landed from a jump with the throttle pin. A lot of really interesting things, and it worked well. But how many of those are there? As good as it was, we loved it. We sent our off-road editor, Dakar stage winner, finished third in Dakar, Jimmy Lewis, various other experienced dirt bike riders, our current photographer, Jeff Allen, great off-road rider, loved the system. And they were like, this is the future of dirt bikes, man. This really makes it easier to do a lot of things, but we're not seeing it.
And of course, the thing is that with a conventional motorcycle, as you roll on in second or third gear, eventually the front wheel comes up on pavement with good grip. So having the front wheel driven has no advantage. The advantage shows up when you have a slippery surface, dirt, snow and ice, you name it. Having 2 times as much unsatisfactory traction has got to be better than just what's coming from the rear wheel. Would
it not be 1.6 times, Kevin? Not to check your math too hard, but if it's 60%, it's not 2 times traction.
No, what I mean is
I do.
2 wheels rather than 1.
I know. I'm just
okay. So conventional motorcycles, so many of the far out project bikes that have been built have 2-wheel drive, as if one day all motorcycles will have 2-wheel drive. And they present this thing that looks like a tuna with a seat on it and handlebars. And you think, 2-wheel drive, off-road tuna? Words failed me.
This is foreshadowing, folks. This is foreshadowing the Crazy Concept Bikes podcast we have in the works.
Lots of them have 2-wheel drive.
Oh yeah, well you have to. Yeah, you've got to do something unusual. You can't just. What do? You're not going to, build another CB750. Come on.
Yeah. So, where are we now?
Oh, where are we? Let's get to the next and final. We'll do a couple more. I think getting the Pirave's Monotracer. This is the poster child for the cabin motorcycle. So this was this Swiss deal, $80,000 to $100,000, enclosed, BMW 1200 RS power.
So beautiful, so slippery looking, so teardrop.
You're in a capsule, crazy very aerodynamic.
Tremendous wheelbase and over 1,000 pounds of weight. So some people just fell in love with this. This has to be what's happening. Because a conventional motorcycle, such as a MotoGP bike or any motorcycle on the street, just crams itself through the air, because it has a drag coefficient that is many times greater than that of a World War II airplane. And the Monotracer or Ecomobile has a 0.19 drag coefficient, which is so much better than any motorcycle that it's just like, well, why don't we give up? The reason we don't give up is because we don't want 1,000-pound motorcycle, and we don't want one with that's 10 feet long.
Well, as the folks in Caltech pointed out when they were doing wind tunnel testing for Harley, back around the Harley Davidson midget. We talked about the XR-TT that, we had a podcast on that.
68. Yeah.
Yeah. A vertical piece of plywood has a better
Pushing through the air. Yeah.
pushing through the air in the tunnel has a better drag coefficient than an unfaired motorcycle.
Yeah. Because at least the piece of plywood is smooth, whereas a motorcycle has all this stuff sticking out of it.
Oh, trash and whirling tires and wheels and
Yes,
junk,
all
and then
that.
a body stuck on it.
But it's small.
Yeah.
The thing about aerodynamic coefficient compares the drag of what you have, the motorcycle is a small thing, with that of the same frontal area as a flat surface. Roughly speaking, that's what it is. So a motorcycle is equivalent to just a piece of plywood plowing through the air. But in MotoGP, they get those things up to 225 miles per hour. They've got the horsepower to just
Push
on. Yeah, crush the air. And 225 miles an hour is a lot more than a commercial airliner breaking ground. The pilot is about to say, gear up, which brings us to the question of what do you do when you stop the Paravis Tracer? It has little training wheels that fold out and hold you up. So, gear up, gear down.
Yeah. We had a guy many years ago come with his homemade capsule type motorcycle, and it had outriggers like that were electro hydraulic assist. So I sat in the cabin and I held my little handlebar, and it was just, it was kind of a frumpy sort of, fiberglass body inline. I want to say it was based on a Kawasaki single. And you swung your legs forward, and it assisted in getting the outriggers out. So you manually had to do this. They were relying on your mapping to do this, whereas the Monotracer, you're inside and it was doing it for you. Pointing out that one of the reasons the Monotracer was so long is it was a two-person unit. You could have a passenger, and the passenger rode behind the rider. So you got to make room in the wheelbase, just like with the Gurney Alligator. You're forcing the body and the engine all in between the axles, so you got to make it longer.
Yep.
But this thing was real interesting to ride and kind of fun. You had to let out the clutch and go, and then as you started to go, you had to kind of the wheels were like some landing gear on tail dragger aircraft, where they have a little bit of wobble in them, so they can land in a crosswind better. The Cessna 195, there's a kit that goes on that.
Caster.
A little bit of caster. And so that's what the wheels would do. And so you'd be sitting, and the wheels weren't the same level as the fore and aft wheels, the normal riding wheels. They were slightly up because you needed to be able to get it on balance to retract them. You needed to have your brain engaged in balance. So you'd be kind of like a little bit kicked to the side at a stop. The light would turn green. You'd hit the clutch, hit the throttle, and start going. And you kind of had to like toss it up, like give it a little tug on the bars, and then would toss it up onto balance. And then you're holding this giant swing thing with your legs, and you'd pull your legs back, and then the things would retract. The outriggers would retract. And then, because your feet are busy, you were shifting with a button, like an air shifter or something. I don't remember the technical details there. It was really interesting to ride. And, it was sort of, again, what's the point? Probably weather protection. And then for him, it was safety. It was being in sort of a roll cage on a motorcycle and wearing a seatbelt. That might be slightly safer than being cast into traffic if you hucked it down the road. I asked the guy who did it, I said, well, how much have you spent on this? And he looked at me. He was a cool guy. And he said, if I told you, you'd either think I was an idiot or I'm a liar. So I'm not going to tell you. And he was, he went around to all the manufacturers and pitched it, and just as Christini was doing, pitching it to all the manufacturers, and it never caught on. The enclosed motorcycle, the BMW C1, the roofed scooter with the windshield wiper. They actually sold some of those. I still see them in Europe when I'm over there.
$13,000 at one time.
Yeah, pretty beat down these days, but they're still out there going.
Yeah,
I mean, it has merit. If you got to ride a scooter, having a roof isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yes.
But my self-image does not say, man, you need a scooter with a roof because you're going to look awesome. It's going to fulfill my dreams of being a pirate or a cowboy or a spaceman or a road racer.
Yes, indeed.
No. I kind of want to talk about the GTS 1000 Yamaha. It sort of overlaps with the Monotracer. And it goes back to what you said about ELF and lowering the center of gravity, the ELF Grand Prix bike. I remember Ron Haslam riding one of those.
You rode many of them.
Yeah.
They build a fresh one every year.
Yeah. So swing arm at the front and, a bunch of linkage between the handlebars that put your steering input into an arm that rotated this thing on a center bearing that allowed the front wheel to turn a certain amount.
The kingpin was inside the hub. It was an inner hub and an outer hub with bearings, large diameter bearings between them. And the front of the swing arm had like an axle, and it had a kingpin on it. And that kingpin engaged bearings that were inside the hub. So you could steer the front wheel through an angle that is somewhat less than with a normal motorcycle, because you'd have to build a bow-legged swing arm to have it steer more. And the great thing about hub steering is that the eye or angular mass of the front end is tremendously reduced. When BMW built the /5 bike, which had a telescopic fork, and they gave up the sidecar adaptable fork, the one with the long leading links, there was a 57% reduction in perceived inertia that opposed your steering effort. So the hub steering does away with all the fork tubes and all that business, reducing the steer inertia even more. So those bikes can get away with rake and trail numbers that are different from what you'd expect in a telescopic fork bike.
Yeah, James Parker did the GTS 1000. He was a notable alternative front end proselytizer out there doing interesting stuff.
And very busy. He built a lot of stuff. So he must have known a great deal at the end. But this was a motorcycle that Yamaha did not provide with a personality. It was simply very different. Oh, wow, that thing doesn't have a telescopic fork. Oh, that's interesting. How interesting was it? Well, it's different. It's different.
Yeah, I mean, it had a futuristic vibe. When that thing debuted, I was in a very intense period of wanting to ride many kinds of motorcycles and dreaming of all these exotic futures. And it resonated. I think what it did for the Yamaha brand was a lot of what Honda has tried to do with all of their technical pushing is that we are a technical company. We have ideas that will enhance your experience. And the industry was driven by tech. The industry was driven by improved performance. Last year, plus 5%. Here's the answer that's going to make your front end work like no other. Results that are positively unreal.
Yes.
So it was that's a Crowder Roller Rocker
yes
ad from way back in the day. Results are positively unreal. That's got to be positive, right?
Yes. Sir.
But it rode nice. It got the GTS 1000, the Tazy. We've tested varieties of Tazys, and they're interesting to ride. They are. People have raced them, but no one's using it. It's solving.
There was one wealthy gentleman who had 3 houses, and he said, I like that bike so much. I bought 3 of them because I spend time at each of my houses, and I want that bike to be there. So
I'm sure that guy was one. I'm sure that guy was one of the personas that are popular right now, where the manufacturer thinks of different personalities, people. They make like a theoretical person, like an architect living in Brooklyn, makes $500,000 a year, likes food, and they just build out this thing, and they say, like, this is how this motorcycle is going to resonate with that. And I'm sure that was the Bimota Tazy was wealthy industrialists with 3 houses, technically oriented. There's 7 of those guys. If we sell 3 bikes to each of them for each of their houses, think of the volume. Think of the volume. Yeah, good stuff. So the first Tazy was pretty old, right? That was the concept for Tazy.
Yeah, the concept from 83 or 83, I think. And wasn't produced for another, 8 years. And it really looked like, if anything is going to be the future, this has to be it. And when they went racing with it, the rider said, well, I want to say positive things here, but I guess I have to say the steering feels vague. And I'm not getting a lot of feedback, a lot of information from the front end, because it's like there's layers of chewing gum between us. And so, okay, well, we won't try to win races with it.
Yeah.
With the Elf Honda thing, the discouraging thing was that each year they would work on improving the bike, and they would make changes based upon the stopwatch. And the changes were moving back toward conventionality. And this deeply offended the revolutionaries who wanted radical high-tech bikes to take over. And how can they take over if you're not making a winner out of the way it began? Well, we're trying to make it faster. And they got 5th place in the 500cc World Championship twice with it during the 1980s, with Ron Haslam as the rider. And that wasn't enough for Honda, so the Elf Honda partnership kind of diverged. Lesson learned.
That wanting of the technical solution and the evolution back to conventionality reminds me of the Buell EBR rim brake. It wasn't moving toward conventionality. They were just trying to make it work, but it just never. It was a pretty good street brake. It was at the very end. It was a pretty good street brake, and I think you talked to somebody who said that directly. I think it was what's his name? Went to Zero. Abe Ashkenazi.
Yes, he did. Yes, yeah. That's the man. That's Abe the man. Ashkenazi. He said, "Forget racing. It's a perfectly good street bike brake," which it is.
Yeah, when they were doing the Hero stuff and in Superbike, World Superbike, they were running out of pads. Your velocity out at the rim was very high, and they had
very high.
Many piston caliper, and then they messed with pad compounds and all of that, and then ultimately I think they just said, "Hey Brembo, can we just run it?" And they did, and
fix it. Yeah,
and then they had brakes at the end of a race. But
a couple of 320s.
Yeah, but the last EBR was pretty good. Although EBR was a challenge because it was small volume, and the big disc, has to be surface ground and has to be flat, just as any brake has to be flat.
Just there, yeah.
And we got a test bike with a finish problem, and so it had a tremendous vibration while braking because the coefficient.
Brake judder.
Yeah, it was shaking the bike up. Nonetheless, we turned excellent lap times, and it might have been even better if the brake hadn't been doing that. But yeah, we get so attached to our notions and dreams that sometimes it's hard to accept reality.
If it's rejecting us, sure. Well, think of all the romances that are based on a misconception.
Yep. It's
They're
we call it,
one-sided.
yeah, you don't want to be precious. So your idea cannot be your little pet. Your idea cannot be your little pet.
And this is the thing that happened with the alternative front ends and things like the Kawasaki's Fubar twin swing arm bike. Where are they today? The things that have come down to us are telelever, paralever, and the single-sided swing arm from that era, late 70s, early 80s. And the radical stuff did not produce improvement enough to justify doing it a different way and tooling all the different stuff that you would have to manufacture to implement those concepts. Everybody's got the stuff they need to make fork tubes. And that's what happens in industry. Once a concept is tooled and everyone's made that investment, which is not small, inventors who come scratching at the window, can you come out here for a minute? I got something to show you.
Well, the other part of this is rider feel.
Yeah.
And the way motorcycles communicate and how they behave. So we grow up riding basically the same kind of motorbike that's been around since really came into being around 53 to 55.
Yep.
Swing arm, telescopic fork.
Yep.
Steering head, all of its shortcomings and its strengths. And we've beat down the shortcomings and expanded the strengths, but it's still the same thing. A little more active, we're getting variable ride height, and we're getting, starting aid device, launch devices, all these other things. But it's still, I would love to get into somebody like Honda to see what kind of information or how much study BMW, the feel. How much is motorcycle feel codified, or are we just relying on a good test rider to say, no, this isn't working. No, there's no clutch feel here. We have to redesign the clutch so that I can tell when friction is engaged, the very first bit, and then I can control it until it's fully engaged and make, how is that codified somewhere? Like, with the
Then we
alternative.
have every sport has, there's the danger that an exceptional person will appear. And in MotoGP, it's Marc Marquez, who's well on in years. He's done a lot of riding
For MotoGP.
And the thing about this man is that on slippery surfaces, he is practically untouchable. Now, it can't be that he's lucky on slippery surfaces. Other people try to keep up on slippery surfaces and they tip over. So he is getting some kind of feedback that is not available to other people, that is not received on their radios. I don't know what it is. But there are many animal senses that supposedly we don't have or they aren't implemented in our genes. And
I think there's two elements to
this feel thing. I'd love to see what is actually known about it.
There's two elements to the Marquez factor. I relate it to my experience with Don Canet. So I've ridden fast, and I've been, fast at press launches, top 3, top 5, because Don was always there in the early days, and Nick Einach was there. And Nick's a very intelligent person, and he's got good reflexes, and he's obsessed with riding. So he's applied his intelligence on how to ride safely, what riders do. That's why he started his school. So I'm referencing off of them, and I'm good on a motorcycle. I went to Arma. I road raced last year at Barber, and I was able to take a bike I'd never ridden on a track I'd never raced, and I won 2 races, and then I got 5th in a pretty competitive class and 6th in that same Formula 750 class. So I did okay, But if I'm testing with Don Canet, I was always seconds off of his pace. And there's where I'm going with this is I'm not pushing the motorcycle to the point where the information is even generated that he's using to do what he's doing. And I think that's what's happening with Marc Marquez. He's able to load the front end in a way that other riders are not, and he's getting information possibly that they're not. I think, like, who knows? I don't know. Could be just all noise in my head, additional BS. Well, thanks for listening, folks. We'll wrap this up. It's a world record length for our podcast. We hope you're still here with us. Thank you for listening. Get down in the comments. Again, thanks to Battery Tender. Also check out Peter Egan's book. And of course, thanks to Octane Lending for sponsoring the podcast as ever. Wouldn't be here without them. Go get yourself some pre-qual on your next motorcycle. You can pre-qualify for a loan. And if you do, you can run out there and pick some up. Thanks for listening. See you next time.